Wonderful. I see a question from Emily.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so the block says that it wouldn't add any cost, any additional cost, because the money could come from fossil fuel subsidies and be reallocated. So what do you make of that?
Well, I am definitely in favor of repurposing fossil fuel subsidies and so support that part of the Bloc vision. Whether that actually happens, that doesn't seem to be what we're currently debating. What we're really debating right now is further augmenting old age security, and the payment plan is up for consideration. I would love to discuss with you some additional options because no matter what, as we repurpose federal fossil fuel subsidies, the key question we need to be asking is, are we repurposing them to pay not only for things that our aging loved ones need, but also to pay for investments for their kids and grandchildren? Monsieur Blanchet, as he has had increased leverage in the House of Commons, is betraying that intergenerational solidarity, focusing only on one age group at the expense of acknowledging the real challenges facing younger Quebecers and Canadians across the country. And I would encourage Quebec reporters to go and review the specific language that Monsieur Blanchet has been using in the House of Commons to be describing this dramatically improved standard of living for younger Quebecers, of which he's so desperately happy. That seems very out of touch with the reality of a financial squeeze facing younger Canadians from coast to coast to coast.
And additionally, would you like to see the federal government have a plan um, for to balance books in the budget over the years, or would you like to
Yes,
see that
brilliant,
as well?
brilliant question. And actually, the CART president's suggestion about reconsidering the thresholds above which we claw back old age security is fundamentally critical to this. Since old age security is growing so much faster than any other line item in the budget, really the only path towards achieving balanced budgets in the relatively near term is to rethink how we ask affluent retirees to reflect on the money they're drawing from OAS or the taxes that they're paying. There are no other line items in the federal budget large enough to restore balance. So, we're running a large deficit right now, but we're doing that at the federal level with the Liberals. We're doing it in Ontario with a Conservative government, and we're doing it in BC with an NDP government. And I'm just emphasizing that to be nonpartisan. Any incumbent government right now must be dealing with the failure of governments decades ago to plan adequately for population aging. That's driving our deficits right now, especially through old age security federally, but through medical care for the aging population who we love. And remember, my mom's 80, so we need to get it right for this demographic. But because previous governments failed to plan adequately, now any incumbent government is struggling with large deficits due to the challenge of now paying for population aging when we didn't plan adequately before.
Thank you. And I believe Catherine Levesque from National Post has a question. Catherine?
Yes, hi. Thank you very much for taking our questions today. I apologize if this was already asked, but I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the Conservatives' decision to vote in favor of the Bloc bill. A lot of people said it was about politics and bringing down the government, but they actually supported the bill in second reading last year. So they are, effectively in favor of raising the OAS for all seniors 65 and up. So I was just wondering what your reaction is about this position. Thank you.
Yeah, well, as a spokesperson for a nonpartisan organization, that I really try to be careful, and you've heard me talk about all of the opposition parties. But given that you've asked specifically about Mr. Poilievre's team, we need to give credit to Mr. Poilievre because his focus on the housing hell facing younger Canadians over the last several years has been really important. And it is part of the reason why his party has increasingly attracted a younger demographic in the public opinion polling. But I worry for Mr. Poilievre and his team that it now looks incredibly disingenuous to be saying, I'm worried about, what's happening to younger Canadians, but to then actually, for, what seem like cynical political reasons that are in their interest about getting an election sooner than later, we are going to further mortgage the future for younger Canadians with larger and larger tax transfers to an older demographic that haven't been planned for. It's going to make it more challenging for Mr. Poilievre to quote unquote fix the budget, because his plan to reduce the deficit, bring the deficit to zero very quickly must go through a conversation about how do we better focus what we currently spend on old age security to help the low-income retirees with little housing wealth that right now Mr. Blanchet has turned our attention to. If only Mr. Blanchet hadn't done it for households that have $180,000 of income as retirees, we would be having a better conversation. And unfortunately, Mr. Poilievre isn't trying to get us to that better conversation. He's just amplifying what in this case really is a terribly unjust intergenerational proposal.
I don't know if you want to venture into, the political analysis, but do you think that could actually hurt him, hurt the Conservatives with younger people? Like you said, I mean, younger people are more.
Yeah, I mean,
Conservatives. Yeah.
Let's be clear. The political analysis is, political parties are smart. All the opposition parties have jumped on the BQ bandwagon because it's good politics to support retirees. But the risk that Mr. Poilievre is going to face as he runs to be the next prime minister is his work on housing hell has been actually helping to disrupt a myth in Canadian politics. The myth is that, retirees continue to be the most economically vulnerable group in society. Now, biologically, as we age, of course, there is more vulnerability later in the life course. And back in the day, in the mid-70s, when my grandmother started out as a young senior, and she lived to the age of 103 and passed away recently, but back in her early days, seniors had especially high rates of low income. But if you flash forward to today, and here, fact check me again, go look at Statistics Canada data about low income by age, and it'll show you, according to the official poverty line, the market basket measure, those over 65 have the lowest levels of low income. And then go and Google StatsCan for wealth by age, and you'll see that retirees have the highest amount of wealth. Now, yes, there are some retirees who are struggling, and let's support them. The CARP idea, the CARP president's idea of changing the OAS thresholds means that we could ask those currently with $180,000 of income to give up a little bit of their OAS and then transfer that in bulk towards those who have low incomes. What a noble, great idea to lift our fellow Canadians out of economic insecurity. But Mr. Poilievre, back to the politics, he is, undermining his commitment to housing hell because it will be easy for another party to be able to say, look, you really care about younger Canadians, then you need to stand firm for a federal budget that's not going to mortgage their future. That actually had been a conservative narrative. He's talking a large part about, fixing the budget, not having deficits, but I worry that he hasn't been looking at table A 1.7, just like Monsieur Blanchet has not been. And only if he looks at that table will he understand that he can't balance the budget by cutting the CBC or getting rid of ArriveCan and a dozen other scandals. Or for instance, he's not a fan of the carbon tax. So not only get rid of that, but get rid of Monsieur Guilbeault's entire ministry. None of those are nearly big enough to get rid of the federal deficit. And so Mr. Poilievre, if he's serious about this part of intergenerational fairness, he needs to not support the Bloc motion. And if he does, it will be easy for other political parties to to showcase to younger Canadians that he's being disingenuous about being truly concerned about their financial squeeze.
Thank you.
Thank you. Although I wish you hadn't made me have to talk in partisan ways. I see another question from City News.
La Presse is first, actually, please, and then City News following. Thank you.
My apologies.
Hi, I was wondering, what do you think of maybe raising the only have the French expression in mind, supplément de revenu garanti.
The guaranteed income supplement.
Yes, there you go.
I apologize, my French isn't good enough to do the press, but that term I understood. So, brilliant question. I think here again, we can work with the president of CARP's idea. If we were to lower the income threshold after which the OAS is clawed back, that could release substantial sums of money that we would inject into the guaranteed income supplement for retirees, so that those low-income retirees, especially if they have limited housing wealth, could not just see a 10% increase to their incomes, as Mr. Blanchet is proposing. It could be more dramatic still. And that's why there's such a win-win-win opportunity here. Now is the time to recognize that a retired household with $180,000 of income isn't really the best recipient of scarce tax dollars, but their fellow retirees who are struggling with incomes below $25,000, they're a good candidate, as are younger folks struggling with housing and high post-secondary debt and high childcare costs, and as our future generations, because we're leaving them large deficits now. So really everything hinges on listening carefully to the president of CARP, who has put this very noble and intergenerationally just solution on the table. And I encourage the Liberal government to invite the Bloc, the NDP, the Greens, and the Conservatives to begin working on this in a shameless way, I might say, put in the fall economic statement a small amount of money for CARP and Generation Squeeze to come together and to propose a plan to alter the clawback for OAS in the way that CARP has proposed. We can have that ready well in advance of the 2025 budget. And if we were to do that, it would be the biggest step forward for intergenerational justice in federal budgeting in my professional lifetime.
Thank you.
Do you have follow-up, Lucas, or?
No, I don't.
Great, thank you. City News, please.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. This lopsided budget arrangement, the elephant in the room graphic, the large amount of spending on older Canadians, is this a uniquely Canadian problem, or is this a post-industrial society problem? Because certainly there are countries with similar economic and age demographic profiles as Canada.
Yes, great question. It is something that OECD countries are struggling with more generally. And here, if Chrystia Freeland was on the call with us, she would want to point out something important. That if you look at Canada's net debt to GDP ratio, it's a technical term, net debt to GDP ratio, we actually are the best in the G7, and I will concede her point on that. And you want to know why we are the best of the G7? Because in the mid-1990s, the Chrétien government said the following: oh my goodness, the aging of the baby boomers going from a bulge as young folks to a bulge as older people later on is going to pose enormous pressures on government spending. And so in the mid-90s, they said, we need to start adapting for that now. We're going to have to raise the taxes or the contributions to the Canada Pension Plan that we're collecting from boomers so that we build up a pool of money they can draw down later. So that's why in 1997, the federal budget increased CPP premiums by 68%. 68%, and that's a big increase, but it is the reason now that the CPP has an adequate supply of resources pooled such that as the boomers age, it is not going to make the CPP go bankrupt. And that pool right now, that pool of funding in the CPP is part of our net debt to GDP ratio and is one of the social policy shining moments in Canada. But unfortunately, in that same 1997 budget, the Chrétien government said, we also need to fix old age security, and they proposed a new seniors benefit. Interestingly, the new seniors benefit would have reduced the income threshold above which OAS is clawed back from today's $90,000 limit to what would have been in today's $70,000. And they proposed a number of other changes as well. That was in the 97 budget. The 98 budget was supposed to start by 2001, and regrettably, it got canceled. And if only we had carried on in that way, we would have at the federal level not been experiencing deficits as we are right now. And so, I'm going to, here again, speaking about a specific party, I'm going to single out the Chrétien government for, on the one hand, having made some of the most important progress towards generational fairness in federal budgeting, but they clearly and knowingly left the job incomplete. And now Mr. Trudeau is picking up that issue federally, and Mr. Ford and Mr. Eby are picking up that issue at the provincial level as it relates to medical care.
And as a follow-up, it's not related to the content of this this newser, but I think it's something that you might be able to speak on. The financialization of housing. Given that many Canadians, older Canadians, have a great amount of financial interest in elevated housing prices, is it possible for Canada to achieve some sort of measure of generational housing fairness without taking some action against these elevated housing prices, which are partially the result of financialization?
Brilliant question again. Thank you for that. And it's very relevant to the conversation right now that the Bloc Québécois proposed. I will direct your attention to an interview earlier in the spring that the Prime Minister gave with a millennial reporter on, I think it was a podcast for the Globe. Maybe it's called Cityscape, City something or other. And the very clever Gen Z reporter said, Prime Minister, you know, for my generation to be able to afford a home, like we need home prices to fall by 50%. If they don't, we're going to be having to save your 20 years to just try and cobble together some sort of, down payment on a small condo. But then she acknowledged, of course, older folks don't want the prices to drop by 50%. And so she asked the Prime Minister, how do you manage that tension? And the Prime Minister, and I'll direct you to his comments in that same podcast, did as any elected official would do in a country where the majority of voters are homeowners, said, we need home prices to retain their value because people are counting on those values for their nest eggs in retirement. And then in the same breath, he went on, but that's not necessarily fair for those who are renters. And I draw your attention to that because one, the Prime Minister then didn't go on to say, well, what are you going to do to deal with that unfairness? But two, he did make explicit the political bargain we now have federally and provincially across this country. Politicians are saying, younger Canadians, you must sacrifice your standard of living to protect the retirement security of older Canadians who are homeowners who are counting on the value of their homes in retirement. Let me say that again. Younger Canadians, sacrifice your standard of living by enduring higher levels of unaffordability, higher rents, higher costs for getting into home ownership. Sacrifice that way to protect those who've gained wealth, myself included, by being a homeowner over the last many decades. And now let's go back and connect that to Mr. Blanchet's proposal to say, younger folks, we now want even more of your tax dollars to grow spending on old age security for some people who have much more affluence and security than you do. This is the same pattern. We're extracting so much wealth from the housing system for those who are older, again, myself included, leaving less affordability for millennials and Gen Z and those who will follow. We're extracting so many tax dollars from government revenue to put later in the life course, leaving less left over to invest in younger people. And what we need, we don't necessarily need home prices to crash. I wouldn't recommend that. I would argue that we want every level of government, provincially and federally right now, to be saying, to restore affordability for all, we need home prices to stall so that over the medium to longer term, earnings will catch up. And in the meantime, those being protected by younger people's sacrifices to their standard of living, older folks with considerable housing wealth. I'm in Metro Vancouver, I have that. How am I and others like me expected to compensate younger folks? How do we show reciprocity for the care and nurturing and protection they're offering older retired homeowners? That has to be the ongoing question. I wish Monsieur Blanchet, when he had additional leverage in the House of Commons, he had held as his ultimatum, Liberal government, come up with a plan for older folks to show reciprocity to younger Canadians and Quebecers who are sacrificing their standard of living to help safeguard the aging loved ones in their families. We need now to show that reciprocity. Instead, Mr. Blanchet betrayed younger Canadians and younger Quebecers by only focusing on the circumstances of an older demographic.
Are there any further questions?
Yes, Milan from La Presse.
Go ahead.
Please.
I want you to come back on the Paul Martin proposal from 1996, I think, to create that income for seniors.
I don't have that in my notes, but yes. Would you like me to tell you a little bit more about that idea?
Yes.
Okay. So in the 1996,
how would have it work?
So there were three components to it. On the one hand, right now, again, we're going to get technical. The income threshold above which old age security is clawback is established at an individual income level. of $98,000 right now. So if you're an individual retiree who has income above $90,000, at that moment, your full OAS starts to be clawed back. If you're two retirees with that level of income in a household, that's how you could have an income of $180,000 and still claim at that household level your full OAS. The Chrétien-Martin proposal said two things. We could drop that income threshold from 90 to 70,000. They were then even more bold still and said, but don't treat it as an individual income, treat it as a household income. Now, this really matters because if you consider the Canada Child Benefit right now, something that is vitally important to many families raising kids, it gets clawed back after household income surpasses $79,000. So just compare that to OAS. OAS, an individual can have $90,000, a household can have $180,000, but a family with kids gets their benefit clawed back at $79,000. Why is Monsieur Blanchet not worried about that? So the Chrétien-Martin idea, reduce the threshold above which OAS is clawed back, turn it into a household, not an individual level. And here's the third piece, and I just love this one. If I were to have a magic wand and do anything tomorrow, I would say, Monsieur Blanchet, I can give you better than what you're asking, and I can make it intergenerationally just. The 96-97 budget proposal identified two tax credits, tax shelters for retirement income. One is called the age credit. One is called the pension income credit. I will encourage you all to go to Finance Canada's annual tax expenditure budget, and you will see those two tax credits cost the government about $7 billion a year together. Now, it's really important to know that they're designed in such a way that a low-income retiree with income below $25,000 is never going to be able to use that tax credit because they don't have a high enough income to get it back. It's not refundable. And so we could start saying, wow, $7 billion a year times the 5 years that Mr. Blanchet has costed out his proposal, that's $35 billion bucks. Mr. Blanchet's wanting $16 billion added to older people. Great, let's not do it to OAS generally. Let's target it into the guaranteed income supplement and improve that and improve its earning threshold, dramatically improve the lives of lower income retirees. But that will leave us about $19 billion left over. And we can then help to reduce the federal deficit, which has been driven largely by the failure to plan for old age security in past years, and have money left over to, heck, we could potentially double the investment in housing over the next 5 years, or dramatically accelerate $10 a day childcare, or finally start to add some real money to post-secondary so students who attend my graduate classes do not need to rely on a food bank, or a homeless shelter while they're trying to study full-time, because it's now very hard to do that and still pay rent.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. That concludes our press conference. Thank you.
Thank you.